Hello, welcome to season 4 of the Science and Entertainment Exchange's virtual programming. Ann Merchant could not be here today, unfortunately, so I'm going to get things started solo. I am Rick Lovard, Program Director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, a program of the National Academy of Sciences. We have done over 3,400 consults since we launched our program in 2008. Including on many of your favorite TV and film programs in which grown people pretend to fly. We also work on documentaries, graphic novels, and video games. If you are a STEM professional and you are interested in volunteering, please do reach out to us. Sachi will put some information down in the chat thread so that you can do that. I want to thank today's sponsor, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, without whose support we could not be doing this programming. Also, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, from whom we get a large chunk of our funding, and also individual donors like many of you, especially through the year-end giving pledge. Thank you so much for everybody who gave. We really appreciate it. It supports this programming directly. I also want to thank Courtney, Sachi, Jeff, and Ameche for technically producing all the back end. I couldn't do anything without them. Thank you. So today, you are going to hear an amazing colleague of mine speak, Vaughan, and then a screenwriter, David Arata, will be joining the conversation. If at any point today you have a question, you can see down here, there's a Q&A thread. I will be dutifully monitoring all of that and passing your questions on to David. So please go ahead and do that. If we don't get to your question, I'm sorry, it's my fault, not David's. My rabbit hole this week are two great pieces in science by a friend of the programs, Rich Stone. If you want some background on today, these are good places to start to look a little bit deeper into what will be discussed. So I am so thrilled to have David Arata moderating today. He's one of the more thoughtful screenwriters working in Hollywood. He's written a lot of brilliant scripts, The Angel on Netflix, for example, or Spy Game. His 2006 film, Children of Men, for me, is one of the top 10 sci-fi films all time. So we're very lucky to have him. And on the other side of the conversation, I got to say, I am constantly a bit amazed by all of the incredible accomplishments and feats that my colleagues at NAS do as true change agents in the world. Normally, this is where I'd insert some kind of joke to set the tone for the event, but honestly, Vaughan's work is so jaw-droppingly meaningful and impactful that all I can do is really tip a virtual cap and ask him to join us on stage. And I think you'll all see what I mean in a moment. So thank you, Vaughan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Rick. And it's actually my absolute pleasure to be here and to share this story, and a story that is one that is really, truly the story of perseverance against hardship by people whose names many of us will never know, and who are working so hard every day. Let me start the story and how we entered it, because I think that this is really one of the most meaningful things that I know I and a number of my colleagues have been part of. So I'll set the stage early on, and almost in a little bit of a chronology about how a number of us got involved in the work in trying to help a group of Afghan scientists and engineers escape what was really and continues to be a terrible situation. Well, this situation for me doesn't actually start in Afghanistan. It doesn't start in Washington, D.C. It actually starts with a colleague of mine, Franklin Carrero Martinez, and I flying home after a trip where we were on the Poland-Belarus border, working on science diplomacy, trying to help navigate some issues around conservation genomics and thinking about things like that. And this is, middle of August, and we're on an airplane. Franklin and I are on our flight back from Europe, our first, overseas flight in a year and a half, thanks to the pandemic. And as we're sort of in the various places, in the lounges, in the airport, we're receiving reports from our colleagues back in Washington that a number of the scientists and engineers that we had worked with through the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine through a program that was supported by USAID were potentially in significant threat as Afghanistan was beginning to become overrun, and Kabul itself was clearly going to fall very quickly. And so by the middle of August, Franklin and I have received a number of concerns saying we are really worried about this fairly significant number of scientists and engineers with whom the Academies has a long relationship with in issues around water or issue around infrastructure. So as we are flying back, Franklin and I are chatting and trying to figure out if there are things that we might do. And almost very quickly, the obvious thing that we were deeply most concerned about as we were hearing stories coming in from Afghanistan was that these group of people, if they were identified as being associated with the academies, but also with a US government program, could be at some significant risk. And so we reached out to our colleagues in the academies and said, are there any things that we have to watch out for on our website that we have to pull down? And instantly our team and our communications office did a magnificent job and pulled down any reference to the scientists and engineers. But Franklin was actually searching up one of the other scientists and engineers' names for a different reason and realized that, yes, while the Academy sites were cleared, the caching and all the other things around a search had actually left a number of these people's names connected to the internet. The result was actually a real concern that had somebody searched, they would have found these names. Well, earlier in the summer, completely coincidentally, Franklin and I had actually been in Silicon Valley. And we had the opportunity to meet with a number of Silicon Valley, sort of the experts in Silicon Valley, including those connected to some of the larger companies. We and Franklin reached out very quickly and reached out to one of our colleagues who had a very close connection at a high level in Google and said, is there anything we can do to get rid of their search history, the search history of our scientists and our engineers beyond what we had already done? Instantaneously, this woman jumped to action, called her very senior level contacts, not only at Google, but Facebook and Twitter, and basically made our scientists and engineers disappear, their digital detritus go away. And so from that, we thought, okay, this is the thing we can do. None of us of this group, and definitely not me, have ever done evacuations. None of us, I'm a scientist by training. Franklin and I worked together for a number of years in the State Department, so we knew foreign policy, but we're both scientists. We're not people that have done, evacuations from hostile areas. We've traveled the world, but we didn't do that. But it was becoming increasingly clear that this risk to these scientists and engineers was such that we really did need to figure out a way to help them get out of Afghanistan if we could. And one of the most important things that we realized was the likelihood of them ending up in a place where it would be a refugee space or maybe get to the United States were actually quite low. And what we really need to do, because these are experts in a field and they've contributed much, was see if there was an opportunity to get them someplace. They weren't going to be able to get to their bordering countries. Those borders were closing very rapidly. Was to figure out if we could get them to a place where they could not only be safe, but that would be welcoming and also allow them to continue their own professional training and their own professional expertise. We, Franklin and I, have had a long-term colleague with a friendship and relationship with a dear colleague of ours named Romain Morenzi, who is a Rwandan mathematician who now runs a very large international science organization called TWAS, the World Academy of Sciences. He had been a senior government official in Rwanda, and when we reached out to him to ask what he thought we might do, and if maybe these researchers could end up in Rwanda, he instantly said, these are people that have the imprimatur of the academies, and they've been in US government programs. Their expertise would be welcome in Rwanda, but you need to reach out to the president of Rwanda and have your president, Marcia McNutt, make that ask. This is, again, middle of August. So even before we knew what we were going to do in terms of getting these scientists out, we realized we needed to get them someplace. So our president of our academy, Marcia McNutt, and the article that was shared refers to some of this, wrote a letter to President Kagame in Rwanda and asked if we could have our researchers go to Rwanda, not as refugees, but as professionals to continue their own career, but also help Rwanda in an area of increasing importance around water and infrastructure. The ambassador to the United States from Rwanda reached out on behalf of the president and reached out to me and said, yes, Rwanda would welcome them. If you can get them out of Afghanistan, Rwanda would welcome them. So now the big problem happened. We had solved the last mile problem, the where to put people, where to send them, that they could continue their lives and critically their families, in many ways young families, to be safe. So by the middle of August, we knew we wanted to send them. We knew we wanted to send them someplace, but now, like tens of thousands of other Afghans, they needed to figure out a way to get out and get to safety. And if anyone remembers those days in late August of the crush of people going to this airport to try to get out, to try to find a flight out. I can sort of imagine constantly this image of one of my favorite movies, Casablanca, and like the plane leaving and seeing, that plane is that hope. And thinking to myself, every one of these people is trying to get on whatever that plane is out. That was the place where everyone was going, that airport. And that airport, and I, again, I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and my colleague Franklin and our colleagues in my space, we're all in Washington, D.C. We're in our houses. We've been in our house for 18 months, except for some minor trips. So our office is our house. And yet we're hearing about all this. And now we're learning about what this airport is. And it's almost like this fortress with a gauntlet leading up to it. To get into the airport, you have to go down these alleys of buildings that are patrolled and manned by the Taliban, who are determining who even gets through to get to the gates of the airport. And so there's this image of thousands of people plus clamoring to get to the airport in late August. And in fact, we had to have communications because, again, we didn't have many direct communications. We had to constantly have discussions with our scientists on the ground to figure out if they should go to the airport. Should they try? What are we hearing from other colleagues that we had learned and developed connections with throughout this? People we actually don't know, but we've all been connected through Signal and WhatsApp functions. And so we had this conversation to try to figure out if we could get our scientists and their families to go to the airport. Again, this airport, once you get there, is not just, you don't just walk into the airport. It's not, Chicago O'Hare, you walk up and you sort of go through security and you're in. This is now, for all intents and purposes, the US Embassy and the last US military outpost in Afghanistan. It's guarded by, barbed wire around the edges. It's got tall, big walls with, big gates on these different areas to get into, and obviously surrounded and the walls surrounded by troops, not only from the United States, but from many of the other countries that have been part of the Afghanistan activities over the last 20 years. So what we saw was really a fairly daunting situation. Tens of thousands of people trying to get there, our small group of scientists constantly figuring if they could even get into the airport. And then if they get into the airport, what do they do? Where do they go? They can't just, hop on the next flight out, the shuttle flight to Pakistan. They need to go someplace that maybe they could get on a US military flight to get out, or one of the now tens of charters that were being chartered by groups and others that were trying to get their own people out. And could we get our folks onto one of those charters? Could they even penetrate the airport? Well, I will say that maybe the one of the most exhilarating nights and then the hardest nights were back to back. The first night was a night, and I say nighttime because Afghanistan is not only 7,000 miles away, it's 9.5 hours difference, which the 9.5 hours is quite complicated too. But one of the things that was the first thing we did was we thought, my goodness, maybe we can help in the middle of our night, which is during their day, help our group, help navigate them, use some connections and contacts we had, some people we knew were having discussions with, even some of the military officers who were on the wall at the airport, to begin to direct some of our scientists and engineers to the airport. And maybe by communicating with them and communicating with others in these various ways, be able to get them close enough to the airport that we could have a connection with somebody that could reach out to somebody who is, manning the wall at the military from one of the forces to identify them and help pull them into safety into the airport. And so in the middle of the night, one night, you can imagine that we told our group, it's time to go to the airport. And they started going, and this group of 20 of them start moving towards the airport, again, with young children also in hand, hiding their phones, because when they had to go through the Taliban checkpoint, we knew that the potential for them losing their phones or having them taken away or being looked at to see who they were talking to was quite large. Well, they go through, they make it to the airport, and we're in communications with all these various people who know somebody on the ground, or who know somebody who knows somebody on the ground. And one group or two of our folks are there. One of them mysteriously, magically gets into the airport, where he is able to actually identify a brother of his who's actually also in the airport and had been working with the US military, who helps drag him and his family through the security, through everything, and gets him into line to get onto one of the charter jets out. And in fact, not charter, the military jets out. And in fact, this scientist and his family end up in the United States. Another one of our families, with his 3 young children and his wife, make it to the fence, make it to the barbed wire area, the barrier. And with conversations going on between intermediaries and everybody, they see them. We hear that, we know that somebody in the airport who can have some influence on getting them across that wire sees them and says, stand by. And I don't know, Franklin and I talk about this a lot. It seemed like an hour, but maybe it was 10 minutes. We're in radio silence, waiting for word on whether one of the military, one of the troops had actually spotted them and grabbed our people and brought them over the wire. And we're waiting and waiting and waiting because we don't have direct contact with anybody. We're hitting it third hand. And finally, about, again, 10 minutes later, we hear, they got them. They got them. They're in. And the relief we had for that whole day, knowing that they were on the other side of the wire and that they were now inside a place where they could begin to get processed into the airport and maybe find their way to a charter that would get them someplace where we could then fly them to Rwanda, was just a heartening moment. For 23 hours, we waited to hear, as their batteries are dying and as their kids are beginning to get a little bit impatient, we hear about them moving closer and closer to the line and that checkpoint where they would then make it to the airport. 23 hours. By the middle of the night that next day, we get a text. We've been thrown out of the airport. We've been thrown into the sewer. There's a canal, a sewer canal running in front of the airport. Me and my family, my children, have been thrown out. And this family basically says, we're going to go home now. And we were all defeated. We'd gotten one family out, but this other family was defeated. And then really within an hour, we then look at the news of a horrendous explosion that had taken place at that gate, that had taken the lives of many Afghans who were sitting in that sewer and near that sewer, and many American troops who had been at that entrance where our scientist and his family had been pulled over the day before. And all we could think at that moment was both sadness that they were not in a position to be on the plane, that they had not gotten through, maybe a little bit of frustration and anger that they had been thrown into the sewer, a loss of pride for that family to be thrown into the sewer, but also a great sense of relief that in a matter of hours, the difference between them maybe being alive today and not having made it was that close. So as the situation in the airport is collapsing and falling apart, and our attempts to try to get them to the airport become more and more risky, as with everybody else, and it's clear that the focus now is getting the Americans and the American associated families out, and that others were going to have much difficulty. We made a number of other tries. We had them on buses. We worked with this wonderful organization, Transit Initiatives, which is a group of former USAID, these women from USAID who worked in very difficult situations, to try to get them on a bus to get into the airport. None of that worked. And I will say we were pretty dejected. We're like, what do we do now? We've solved the last mile problem, and this chances of us getting them out of Afghanistan just seem to drop by the day. But as I said, I mentioned this group, Transit Initiatives, this group of women from USAID who worked in post-conflict societies. They sort of banded together and started this sort of ad hoc little group to help a large number of families in Afghanistan. And we get a call from one of them saying, we're basically evacuating Kabul. We don't think the likelihood of getting out from Kabul in the next 2 days, this is the end of August now, is realistic. We're going to move them someplace else. So our families, we give our family options. We say, look, you can stay in Kabul. We don't think you'll get out of the airport, or we can get you on a bus. And if you get on a bus, maybe we can take you to a different city up in the north of Afghanistan, get there before everybody else shows up there. And maybe there's some charters from there or something else. It's closer to Uzbekistan, who knows? So sure enough, the end of August, our group gets on a bus and does an all-night drive up to Mazar-i-Sharif. And I would say, that whole night, just sitting there, making sure, knowing there are Taliban checkpoints everywhere, just getting the updates from the road as they're driving was, again, just absolutely mind-blowing and terrifying. And then we hear they arrived and we're like, oh my goodness, they're here. Now they must be closer to getting out. It took 30 days. And for 30 days and one of the people that was there was that gentleman and his family who had been thrown into the sewer just days earlier. He became really the leader of the group of scientists that we had sent up there, the person with whom we had the direct conversations and directed movements while they were in Mazar Sharif. And that whole time, we were hearing reports constantly with all these different groups. And it's all, some of it's rumor, some of it's hearsay, some of it's true, about everything from WhatsApp has been hacked to there are death squads of Taliban going through this city looking for Afghans and killing people and executing them. And all of this is happening and you feel powerless. And yet you know that you have to continue to provide the guidance to these people who have entrusted you with their lives, who are turning to you every single time and saying, we are hearing this. Should we go to this Mazar-e-Sharif airport now? And we'd have to say no. And when I get on the line with David, I'll finish it with a story about Franklin, which was very funny towards the end of this activity. All this is to say, by this point in the endeavor, we continue to know where we could send them, where we could send our colleagues, where we could get them into Rwanda. We just didn't know how to do it anymore. The one thing that we knew was an airport gets people out, and now that had closed down, and now the U.S. was gone. David, I'm going to invite you now to continue our conversation. If I hope I've given some, but
I think that was great, Vaughan. Thank you. I have a couple of questions that are maybe ways of just, well, first I'm going to ask him as, what it sounds like to me is you are just a regular guy doing a regular job, and then all of a sudden you and your friends realize people you care about are in jeopardy, and you have no skill set to rescue them, and no idea of exactly how to eradicate them on social media, to reach out to people. So I'm like, it's kind of like Argo. You're like battling with everybody, trying to come up with ideas, which is the issue that needs to be addressed first. Correct. I mean, it's and so the list of problems are, first, how are we gonna keep the Taliban from understanding who they are and focusing on them as targets? The second step is, what excuse can we come up with to differentiate these from everyone else that's trying to get out of Afghanistan? What could we come up with? And I'm sure you're batting around ideas day and night, and then somebody just comes up with this idea that we can use a COVID protocol.
Yeah. So this was Franklin. We were, as you mentioned, on the phone sort of constantly day and night. And I remember these dates because both Franklin and I had said after our trip to Europe, we're going to take our 1 week annual leave over the summer now. I was going to go up and see my sister and my mother for their birthday, which is the 14th and the 16th. I always have to remember that, of August. And Franklin was going down to visit his family. And sure enough, it's this endless piece. And one of the issues was, as you mentioned, David, was the real challenge. There are a lot of high priority people to get out of Afghanistan. Everybody from civil society activists who may have been supporting issues that would be viewed as so progressive that it would put them in real danger, to those that obviously had been known and identified as helping the US military. So a group of scientists and engineers that are small in number in some ways, right? They're not groups of hundreds of them that we were trying to get out. It was groups of 20s of them that we were trying to get out. Really are not, and because we don't have the ability to do it ourselves, are not people that would be on the radar for anybody. So one night we were talking to a group that was this group that was, I mentioned before, Transit Initiatives, who had identified a charter jet going out of Kabul that could get to Uganda. And there were a lot of complexities with that. And we basically have been put in touch with them, and we said, and Franklin came up with the idea, one thing that we could offer is, what happens if we said, we'll do a COVID protocol for all of the people? If we get our people on that plane, we'll fly to Uganda, because we knew if we get to Uganda, it's easy to get into Rwanda. We'll land in Tibet airport, and we'll go there with one of our colleagues who's an MD who had been doing COVID testing for Maryland. And we'll go there with a bunch of COVID tests And maybe if we could even find vaccine, we'll bring vaccine with us and get this whole group COVID protocol. And then in return, we'll get our folks on this flight.
And it worked.
Well, it worked to the degree that this group now identified us as connected to them. So we didn't get out to Uganda. This group actually got us out through a different way much later. But we still, to this day, I think Franklin still has 1,000, well, I guess I shouldn't say this in this environment, 800 COVID tests that we were waiting to use, rapid tests, because we were going to deploy them. We still are going to have to deploy them someplace else, but this was going to work had that happened. It ended up that charter flight never got off the ground. Now, these charter flights aren't, the top of the line planes. They have engine problems. They don't get clearances. They have to get the permissions to not only fly out of Afghanistan and land in Uganda, they got to get air permissions from everybody. And if you're sort of kind of making this up as you go along, being able to fit together all those pieces is quite difficult.
So yeah. It sounds like that. I mean, when you tell the story, I'm thinking that you wake up or one morning or one night, and there's an event that is going to be can be a life-changing event for you. It could be hope, or it could end up in tragedy. But for the people that you're trying to help in Afghanistan, it's life and death.
It's life and death.
And when you were just mentioning that story of the family that was going through the gauntlet and going through the checkpoints, I'm sure terrified, makes it through the barbed wire fence, makes it through the gate, and then eventually gets thrown out. Can you tell me a little bit more about that family, who they were, and your contact with them?
So that family, we remain very close to that family. In fact, this family, and I won't use the full name, but the first name is Hamid, is this wonderful gentleman, and his family is this wonderful group of 3 children and his wife Hamid, and he's an engineer. He's an infrastructure engineer in Afghanistan, had worked on a number of projects that were associated with us. A younger guy, a young family, younger man. He had taken on really not only the responsibility for his family, but as this evacuation went forward, not out of his own choosing, took on the responsibility of being the leader for the small group that we were now moving around Afghanistan. And so he's somebody who I've had an opportunity to meet, actually, not to give it away. I'll give it away. Our folks ended up, the ones we ended up in Rwanda ended up there. On the last day that I was in Rwanda, Franklin and I both went over to Rwanda to meet some of the families as they came. He shows up and we see him. And one of the things that's amazing about him is he's somebody who you could just hear in his, not in his voice, because we didn't talk by phone, you could hear it in his texts, that he was going to keep this thing together. He was going to hold together the family. He was going to hold together this group that was now in Mazar, vulnerable, worried, scared. He was going to be the point. He was going to take this on. He knew that the National Academy of Sciences was going to help, but he had to be the person that had to translate why they weren't going to the airport that day. And we had to say to him, no, you're not going. Okay, why? He was somebody who just takes this on. He's a man of both peace, but a man of action. And I can't imagine the responsibilities of having to move, a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old through this environment. And there's a story at the end with the 7-year-old.
Right.
That
family must have been terrifying for those kids, and must have been. And you said that he was facing defeat after defeat, and particularly after the explosion. Defeat after defeat first, and then the explosion where scores of Afghans are murdered, and the U.S. servicemen, which must have felt like it changed everything, and he still kept going. He wouldn't give up. Right.
Still kept. If there was an opportunity, if there's a bus going into the airport that they could get on and meet, and and there's a bus that may be going to the airport. And I remember one of the last days before they left Kabul, he was on this bus that just circled the airport.
Right.
He had no chance of getting in. The gates were all closed, but he was going to figure out and try to make it any way he could.
So for you and your group that were back, well, I'm thinking in the US, but they could have been everywhere. They're communicating on Zoom. You're up all night. You're not doing anything but working on this, trying to solve these problems. And at first you have these victories, and then you have defeat after defeat after defeat after defeat. And were you afraid that you just were going to lose?
Yes. Terrified. Yeah. So there's two stories on that. One is Franklin and I would wake up after an hour of sleep, and literally we almost had the phone on all the time. It was not even that we called each other. It was sort of like the phone was plugged in and on constantly, to the point that, and I'll take the blame for this one, literally we were on the phone with somebody, a third person in the US government, doing something, having a conversation at 4 a.m, and I fell asleep, and Franklin said, "You were snoring last night." I mean, we become almost like a married couple, separated by two different parts of DC. I remember almost every morning he and I would talk after having our coffee and trying to get a little bit of sleep. And the first question I'd ask is, "What do you think? What's the percentage?" And I'll tell you, David, most days we'd be 55% they're going to get out, 60%. Then there would be days, by the way, we'd be like 90%. And the next day it would go down to 60%. There was one day when I remember they had been in Mazar for a while, the family, and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think it's under 50%. And he said to me, "Then why are we doing this?" Because, all of us, the whole group of us, we're not doing anything else. This was all we were doing. And if we don't think it's going to happen, why are we doing this? And then there's another colleague of ours, Kathy, who, I mean, just an absolute light. She would send one of her people actually got involved and helped. The person that actually got on the flight in the airport and who ended up in the United States, it was the person that she had identified to help. She would keep saying, "It's going to work." And she wasn't being it wasn't like, "Oh, it's going to work." She's like, she had just an unbinding faith. It's going to happen. Just keep the faith. Keep us always working. She would keep us sort of motivated, and she'd send the most, really, truly, some of the nicest texts during it that would keep hopes going. Because As you said, David, it could have gone either way.
Right.
Almost did.
And so you were able to get families out. And when this particular family, Hamid's family, got out, they went to Rwanda?
They did. But nothing ever goes as you expect. So one night, late at night or early in the morning or whatever it was, Franklin gets a message from the like I said, the group we were connected to. And they said, by the way, this was also true. Our folks had a tremendous set of advantages, not just that we were helping them, but they had a number of advantages. Two of the most important advantages they had is every member of their family had a passport, a valid passport, and everybody had a place to go, Rwanda. So that gave them a tremendous advantage to begin with, that all they needed to do was get on something that would allow them to go someplace else, and they wouldn't have to be there very long, and they could get to Rwanda. The truth is, most of the families that are there either don't have passports or have no place to go. So they're not now the group that's easy to invest in. Well, so since our group had, and Hamid and his family and all of our group had valid passports, Franklin gets a call or a signal very early in the morning that says, "There's a charter flight going out of Mazar that's going to have room on it. There's room for 6 people, a group that was going to go on there didn't have passports. Your folks have passports. Can you identify 6? And Hamid had 5 in his family. And so we said, this person here, I mean, he just earned it. So they get out, they get it, they make it on. And we get this wonderful photo of him and his children, sitting 4 of them sitting in 2 seats on this charter. Little kids, but they're all sitting there. There's not enough seats for everybody. These planes are full. And the big, bright, beautiful smile on these children's face who have been through so much. And they're getting on this airplane out, and you're thinking, there it is. And we're like, phew, they're out. And then we find out that they end up caught up just bureaucratically landing in a place that had a hospitality village, which is basically a refugee center. So all we're saying is get our people out of there and they can get to Rwanda. We've got a flight, we've got to pay for it. And they're caught there. And then the people in the government of Rwanda, contacts that Franklin and I had, we reach out to our colleagues in Abu Dhabi and say, we've got this family, they can get out. And they'll say, we'll see what we can do. They're caught in this place, which is sort of like a processing center. There's nobody really there. It's a processing center. But we'll see what we can do. And then we get, well, now Franklin and I, by the way, are in Rwanda at this point, helping another family who's just landed. And we get this set of contacts back from Hamid. I'm being driven now. My family and I are being driven now to go get another COVID test. We think we may be going to the airport. I think we're going to the airport. And there's this wonderful travel agent we work with who's made 1,000. By the way, if anybody needs to get to Kigali from any place between Bulgaria and Pakistan, I probably know a connecting flight that I could tell you about and which airport to go to. Hamid gets on, and his family finally get on this flight. And they land. And in Rwanda, when you land, they COVID protocol, you actually have to walk, not to visit people, but to walk right to a taxi that takes you to your hotel after you've gotten your COVID test, to wait for your results to come in. Well, Hamid and his family are there. They get released from COVID protocol. They've been deemed, they were negative on the PCR. And we're going to take the families out. The family that had already arrived with their 4 members, and Hamid and his family. And we take them out to this wonderful restaurant in Kigali, beautiful, this beautiful restaurant, beautiful sort of food, and just wonderful people. And we're sitting there with this family of Afghans. It's their one group's 3rd night, and Hamid and his family is their 1st night, and they're these little kids. Well, we've remembered from looking at the passports from everybody that the daughter turned 7 the day that they arrived in Kigali. And Franklin reaches out to a friend of his who speaks Dari and says, can you tell me how to say welcome in Dari? And write it out. And sure enough, this friend of Franklin's writes out in Dari, welcome. And the little girl's name is Maliha. Welcome, Maliha. And this is her birthday, her 7th birthday. And Franklin shows it to the waiter. And the waiter goes back to the kitchen and talks to the chef. And the chef makes a brownie with a birthday candle in it and takes it over to bring to Maliha for her 7th birthday, her first day and first night in Rwanda. And all the families that are there, and Franklin and me, and we're singing happy birthday. And at that moment, it's quite clear to the family that as they put down the plate, written in Dari, in icing, is welcome Maliha. And there's this 7-year-old girl celebrating her birthday with people she doesn't know, with other kids she's never met. And these kids are sort of holding on to each other, like physically touching each other. Because for the first time in a long time, they were safe, and they were with other kids and other children and their age, and they're holding each other and singing happy birthday. And she blows out her candle, and it's just this feeling of we made it. And particularly this family, after all they had gone through, from sitting in a canal of sewage to now not at home and with all sorts of other issues going on, but celebrating a birthday in this beautiful restaurant with other Afghans whose now lives are beginning again and anew.
Wow. And how many people were you able to rescue?
So in Rwanda, we have 19. There are another probably about 10 or 15 that we help sort of directly get out. And then just throughout this process, and this is true for everybody that's been involved in this, at any given moment, you were acquainted with other people because there were small numbers of groups helping, but you'd hear about somebody, or here's another group. Does anybody have a contact at the State Department to get their names into this list? Or does anybody know anybody here that can help with this group? Or for example, one of the sort of higher profile groups, their bus had made it to the airport. They were given permission to leave. Their bus had made it to the airport, but somebody had not gotten the paperwork to let them out. And they said, oh no, they're going to be turned away. Does somebody have somebody who can call somebody to tell them, to tell the whoever was manning the US positions there to let the bus through? And we just happened to have some contacts who were able to reach out. And it was everything from realizing that the official activities were sometimes unfathomable and not clear what was going on. And yet people within the government, working in the government, were working also tirelessly, oftentimes on their own time, to help. We had colleagues in the White House who would stay up at 3 a.m, literally, and say, call us anytime if we can help out.
Wow. And so rescuing people and getting them into countries where their life is not threatened is just the beginning. Now they have to start their entire new lives. And have you been in contact with them? How's that going?
Constant contact. So it's and so I'll finish with so let me just finish with, so we get Hamid out, and we got another family out too earlier. This other family, which is one of my favorite stories. He was a senior government official and is basically under threat with his family. We get acquainted to him through our colleague Dalal and Daniel, who knew of him and had kept track of him, and he'd been sort of associated with this program. But this person's name is Naeem, and he's just this wonderful person, and we're working with him, and he's able to sort of, in a sophisticated way, figure out a way that he could get to Pakistan. He gets like the one flight out that goes to Pakistan, gets on it because he had a colleague in Pakistan who bought him his ticket, because there was this charter that was going every now and then. He gets on it to Pakistan, and we get him out from Islamabad to Kigali. He's the first family that shows up. This is the first family that shows up. And as I mentioned, that sort of that walk and everything else. And Franklin and I go to meet them at the airport, and with this expectation of, this is the first family we actually helped get out, that's actually out, that we're going to see, that we're going to meet. And so we see them getting out of the airport, and you can see both a relief, but what was noticeable is, and for every family, they've left their entire lives, and they've got 2 suitcases. Imagine leaving, being told you're going to go live someplace else for 3 months, and the bags and bags and bags that will come. These people may never go back to their homes. They're leaving a place where the moment they left their door to start this journey, they would never see it again. Literally, who knows what's happening in their houses. And they're showing up at the airport, and they've got 2 bags.
Right.
And those are the bags from which they're going to start their lives. And so I see them walking, and Frank and I see them walking, and they're exhausted. I mean, exhausted. And they go, and this is the story that I love. Throughout this, Franklin had to take on a persona, because we had to give these folks directions, but we didn't want them, if anybody found out, that it was coming from Americans giving them directions, where to go here, don't go here, get this bus, don't get that bus. So Franklin took on a persona, and one of them was named Muhammad, and Mr. Muhammad, who would have to give some directions every now and then. And this man, Naeem, they clear COVID protocol. We sit down to meet with him, to have a drink with him, to talk through things. And Franklin turns to him and he says, I am Mr. Muhammad. And the look of just, everything was starting to connect. Here I am in Rwanda. Whoa, what just happened here was just remarkable. So they get out. We then meet with a number, and then the other family got out, as I mentioned. We're having breakfast, and Naeem starts talking about something, and somehow cricket comes up. And our colleague from the Rwandan government goes, oh, Rwanda has just started a cricket club. And Naeem's eyes just beam, and he goes, I'm very good at cricket. And he says, connect me. So now he's like, I just imagine like the Rwandan national team with this Afghan now playing, the ringer on the Afghan cricket team. The other families we also got out. It took them a little bit longer, but not much. And they too, these 3 additional families, and they're now also in Rwanda. So the answer, Dave, is yes. We keep very close contact with them. They are one of the most important things was to keep them having their dignity as scientists and engineers, So they're employed by the University of Rwanda, and we're going to work with them on a workshop on transboundary water. Big issues, a major topic going on.
Right.
Other families we keep in contact. One of the things that I'm very aware of is that, and one of the challenges, and not just for this group, is, they've, particularly the children, the children don't have, the ones in Rwanda do, but many of them who are in these different villages, or these different refugee villages, don't have access to education. And they're not getting education. These are, children. In many ways, one of the great success stories of what happened in Afghanistan is particularly the girls were going to school. And now we're in a situation where, at least for the time being, while they're waiting, they're not accessing that education that we so badly, one of the reasons why the Americans and others fought so hard was to provide that. And now they're not having it. So what to do with that? At the same time, how do we connect them more? I think I mentioned in an earlier conversation, my daughter has started a little book club for Afghan girls to try to get the girls in Rwanda connected to some of the girls in the United States to read a book together once a week, to learn American English. So we keep contact with them in different ways. And it's almost hard not to.
Right. There's some questions from the audience, and one of them is from Lisa. Did the scientists know they were going to Rwanda? Did they even care?
They did. So it's a great question. And one of the things early on that I sort of skipped over in the early days was when after the ambassador reached out and said, yes, that the government of Rwanda will accept the scientists. We had reached out to, because it's not just this group of scientists. We had affiliation with some other scientists and engineers who were part of this program. And we reached out and asked the question, we think we might be able to get you to Rwanda as a place for safety. Who would want to go? And I think, and again, for many, many reasons, some said no, that was just not something they don't know what that is. I mean, they've never been there. So I can imagine you talk about multiple leaps of faith that have to be taken. And a number of the scientists and engineers that we reached out to said, no, I'll try to get to a place that I know better, or maybe I can get out here or something else. It's the ones that said, and I'm sure it was not a, sure, yes, I think it was a, okay, this is the thing that's going to save us. We have to do this. That's the group that's there now. They're the ones that said either they felt more threatened or they felt more that they could handle it. But the group that's there, and in fact, one of the ones that's in the United States was also going to go, but he ended up an astronomer, but he ended up getting to the United States. This was the group that we focused on because they said, we'll go. And, the culture shock. Now, what's interesting is Naeem also said, Naeem said, I didn't know anything about Rwanda, but I started reading about it. And their past was pretty bad. They had a tough time too. And almost instantly in our conversations with the Rwandan officials, with the Afghans, you could see a merging of experience. We've been through a pretty tough time too. In fact, I remember the vice chancellor of the university was talking about bringing these folks on as lecturers. He said that during the genocide, I left. I was out. I had to leave Rwanda, and it was a university in France that gave me a position. He was a PhD, gave me a position, and that university, when I came back, that university saved my life. It saved my dignity. I could come back to Rwanda and help my country as a scientist. He goes, and he said, I remember this explicitly. He said to us, "We know these people. We know these people. We know who they are."
Wow, that's great. So Amy was asking, I mean, I know that you didn't have any experience in rescuing people out of a country where everyone might get shot at any moment. And I know you were putting this together with stuff out of your junk drawer and chewing gum, but she's wondering about what were the connections that you had that you think were the most important that enabled you to have this success?
Well, so it's, I think it's a number of things. I think first of all, a group of us, and it was a group effort, had been working in the international scientific space for many, many years. So we had contacts with people who could help in any way they could, even if small. We had programs at the academies that span the world. So for example, there was a group in Pakistan that our organization had worked with for a long time on a number of different topics, who, because we had built that trust, said we can help these groups as they're transiting out. They can't stay, we can't keep them here, but we have access. We can get them their medical test. We can get them their COVID test. We'll take care of them. When they're here, they're our guests. We'll walk them to the airport. And that was built because we had that long connection. So there are things like that. It was long histories of having connections with people that we could reach out to and say, can you give us advice? It's also true that, at least in the case for Franklin and me, we had the opportunity to work in the State Department. From like 15 to 18 had worked or 15 to 17 had worked in the State Department. I had worked there once before as well, as at Franklin, a different time. And so we knew people, and we could, even if they couldn't help us, officially, they could help guide things. They could say, make sure if you want to get your folks out, they need to be on this list. We knew colleagues through programs at different parts of the government that could help give us advice or make connections to others. Say, we're not focusing on non-US citizens, but we heard about this group over here, which is looking to charter a plane. You might contact them. So I think all of those things. And then again, years and years of having worked in an international space, so sort of at least understanding what different things were, probably helped the most, and the institution being behind us. The truth is, I say something, the president of the National Academy of Sciences on day one said, anything you need, you tell me, and we'll help out. She provided some internal funds to make things. She reached out to, I don't think it's going out of schools, the Packard Foundation almost instantly reached out and said, we can provide you with a discretionary grant to help pay for the things you need to pay for. If we didn't have that money, it was not big money. If we didn't have that money, we wouldn't have been able to move people around. So it's a lot of things that contributed to success.
Right.
And WhatsApp and Signal, and having a really good fast charger for my iPhone.
Right. And you mentioned that people were loading up on when they were trying to leave. They were loading up on cell phones, and instead of like going through the gauntlet with ammo, they would be everywhere. And that would be because that they might not be able to charge them, or can you kind of?
So everything. So, it's basically the phone is the lifeline. The phone is the one form of communication that they could depend upon to be given instructions on what to go do. And it was often 4-way conversations, 7 different Signal conversations taking place, and then 2 WhatsApp conversations taking place on our end. And we'd have to give them directions. And in order to have that, they need to have a phone. They need to have an ability to receive that information. And so that meant 2 things. One is the phone had to be charged, and there aren't a lot of charging stations sitting around Kabul airport, even within, what do you do if you get out? How do you communicate? I'm out. The second one is not only the charge, but the very real threat that the phones would be taken away. That either during the melee that was this effort to get through the Taliban checkpoints, where people were getting beaten with sticks or hit or pushed or shoved or everything else, phones would either themselves just sort of get lost. I mean, I drop my phone 10 times a day, and I've got no one pushing me. And as likely, the Taliban would take them away, would just take away the phones. And so there were all these different things. Oftentimes women would hide the phone because they would assume the Taliban wouldn't do as thorough a check on women as on the men. So all these different things. And as you mentioned, there's just this image of people literally stuffing their pockets and they're almost stuffing phones in their socks to make it through the gauntlet so they could have some form of communication. That was the link to the outside world.
Right. We have another question, which is, how many scientists are left in Afghanistan? Do you know?
Oh, I don't. I mean, the scientists writ large. I mean, they're hundreds, if not thousands. Even within our group, we know that of the scientists and engineering community, there's at least 6 or 7. But that number is, it's way underestimated. It's it's thousands. A colleague of mine, Becca, who's in the Academies has a committee on human rights, which has a long history of standing up for the human rights of scientists. They put together all sorts of sort of cross tabulation sheets. Now, some of them are duplicates, but it's probably, of the engineers and scientists and academics as a whole, thousands. I mean, this is 20 years of a massive investment by the US and others, but mostly by the US, to build that infrastructure to increase the amount of technical capacity in a country. And after 20 years, that built up. Now, they're not all PhDs. Many of them were contractors and engineers working on things, but it's a very large number, and they're still there. And the situation there is not getting better. In fact, it's getting significantly worse.
Right. So is there an ongoing effort to try to solve this problem?
I mean, what was interesting is we went from constantly monitoring our signal channels, because we were all part of all these groups, to, as our group got out, maintaining connections with all those groups, but continuing to hear through them, but maybe not being as active and as engaged about all of these people. Many of them were still part of the original group of this original group that I mentioned had gone up to northern Afghanistan with our group back in August. There's still a large number of that group, which was 400 at the time, whittled down, that are still trying to get out. And you feel for them, because you hear all the complexities. Most of them don't have passports or a place to go.
Right. And another question is, what can we do as US citizens to help alleviate this problem?
Well, I think part of it, I think it's multiple pieces. One of them is, for those that are still in Afghanistan, there are groups that continue to try to help people get out. And that's oftentimes a function of trying to help people get out means helping, pay for the types of things that we were able to pay for, because we had a foundation and internal funds paying for it.
Right.
The other piece is, there are a large number of refugees in the United States right now. Not discounting the fact that there are many all around the world, and the Afghan refugees that are in these places, there's the usual clothing. Just the other day, it's funny. I was just talking to one of our colleagues his sister broke her ankle playing soccer. I realized these kids are on these bases, and they're playing soccer with each other. None of them have the shoes, and definitely don't have shin pads, and just little things to make their lives easier here.
Right.
We're also thinking through how we can build education programs, even if they're short term, to keep these children connected.
Right. And I probably can't imagine, but I can fantasize that I might be able to imagine how life is changing for at least some of these scientists. But for you, I mean, I know you mentioned once that every time your phone single pings, you get tense. Is that it? How has this changed your life?
So I think it's, what's interesting is we've gone from that feeling of constant emergency to now thinking about how can we be part. Hey, we have a lot of other jobs to do. This, as I mentioned, until early August was not something I spent any time on, nor did many of my colleagues. But now it's, how do we think about this in the way that says there's a set of things we should be building out of this? What are the positives that we can be doing in this space? And so I think some of it is feeling a little bit more connected. I mean, by background, it's and I know from my colleague Franklin and some others, we are also, progeny of refugees. I'm an Armenian. My family was refugees, and so just knowing that around the world there are more refugees everywhere, and we're not going to help them escape, but there are maybe things that we can think about. And this is what I think about, and I know my colleagues do. What are the things that we can do to help them and others like them be better connected, and as nerdy as they sound, better connected to science and math, the things that make their future wonderful, and particularly the kids. My colleague I mentioned, Romain Morenzi, told me something. He said, a country invests in its higher education for prosperity. A country invests in its elementary education for security.
Right.
And we have these now thousands of children sitting around the world who are decoupled from their educational framework. And are there things that we can do?
Right. do we have time for, we have time for, well, maybe one more question for you. And that is, Bob was wondering if that maybe you could mention a few of the other people that were your colleagues that were helpful.
I'm going to mention them by first name just to not give away their last name. It's okay, but we have just an absolutely wonderful team. I mentioned Franklin a number of times. I mean, he's my somebody I've known for years. I mentioned Kathy. Kathy was truly light in so many times of darkness. I mentioned Dalal's name. Dalal was one of the key people that had worked directly with these scientists and engineers through this program. As had a woman, Kelly, and Daniel worked directly with these scientists, so knew them personally, having worked with them in the program, and had to take on so much sort of personally, because as things were desperate, one of the things for Franklin and me is we could stay a little bit reserved because we didn't know them. We could help direct things but those are my colleagues that knew them and knew the struggles and knew their families and knew the pain that they were going through and had to manage that communication and not sound hopeless, but also tell them we don't know a lot. We can't. That was heroic. A colleague of mine, Rita, who just had all of her connections in Pakistan that were able to come to bear and help people out. Colleagues from literally around the world who stood in and helped. Our colleagues from everywhere else that were just there to help us inside, help make sure the money moved. How do we make sure that money's moving? There are no bank accounts, so we couldn't legally send money place. But how do we help the Afghans that are in Rwanda do what they need to do?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I think it was amazing. You did an amazing thing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. No, David, thank you. I really appreciate it, and appreciate everybody that had been contributing to this. So thank you.
Vaughan and David, I got to say that's an incredible story. And, as communications officers at NAS, it's an honor for our whole team to really be showcasing the work that you did and provide a virtual stage and microphone for both of you. And Vaughan, I want you to know there was a real outpouring of people saying thank you for the work that you did in the Q&A. I also thank all the supporters of the exchange. David, that was an incredible job moderating the conversation. Next week, the exchange is going to be off, but on January 26th, you should know that Princeton's Shane Campbell Staten will be doing a talk on rapid evolution and how human behavior may cause that. So we hope to see you in 2 weeks. And thank you again, Vaughan and David, for this week. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.